Like I said earlier, they actually had odds that, she was like third or fourth in the betting odds to be MVP of the WNBA. That's such a slap in the face to every WNBA player. It's unbelievable, right?
Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. One decision, one word, and suddenly an empire crumbles. For Caitlin Clark, revenge wasn't about firing shots on social media or snapping back in interviews. Her retaliation was devastatingly simple. She said no. No to Geno Auriemma. No to UConn's storied legacy. And years later, a resounding no to the $1 million offer that came crawling back to her. On paper, it seemed absurd. Who walks away from over $1 million for just 8 weeks of basketball? But this wasn't just a contract. It was the lifeline of a man who once casually dismissed her, subtly belittled her, and treated her like an afterthought. When Clark rejected it, she didn't just pass on a paycheck. She humbled the man who never thought he could be humbled. This tale is far bigger than basketball, extending beyond mere points, assists, or trophies. It's about the raw, undeniable force of power itself. For decades, Geno Auriemma stood as the undisputed gatekeeper of women's basketball. He was the legendary coach who decided who mattered, who earned the spotlight, and whose dreams faded into obscurity. But Caitlin Clark, with a quiet defiance, utterly flipped that script. She didn't seek his approval, his revered program, or his checkbook. Instead, she meticulously constructed her own empire, brick by brick, entirely without him. And when he finally, desperately, reached out, she turned him away with the kind of quiet authority that screamed, "I don't need you. You need me." Every compelling revenge story begins with a profound mistake. Geno's wasn't a botched play or a poorly timed timeout. It was pure, unadulterated arrogance, a blinding, self-assured hubris. Before Clark became the magnetic face of the sport, before the sold-out arenas and the record-shattering TV ratings, she was simply a kid with an ambitious dream. She admitted it openly. UConn, with its storied dynasty and the legendary shadows of Teracey, Moore, and Stewart, was the mountaintop of women's basketball, the coolest place on earth. For a girl growing up in Iowa, nothing loomed larger. When recruitment season arrived, the path seemed undeniably obvious, the most electrifying talent of her generation uniting with the greatest recruiter the game had ever known. Yet, the anticipated call never came. Geno Auriemma never picked up the phone, never called Clark herself, never even contacted her parents, barely sending a message through her AAU coach. For the greatest recruiter of all time, that silence wasn't merely deafening. It was a deliberate choice. The message resonated clearly: she simply wasn't his priority. His flimsy excuse? UConn had already secured Paige Buchers, and he supposedly didn't want 2-point guards. On the surface, it might have seemed plausible. But then came the true insult. Geno suggested that if Clark truly desired UConn, she should have been the one to call him. Think about that for a moment. The coach who forged his entire legacy on spotting once-in-a-generation talent years before anyone else decided Caitlin Clark wasn't worth the effort, and then had the audacity to blame a teenager for not chasing him. That wasn't just a recruiting miss. It was a profound act of disrespect, the kind that imprints itself deep within. And in return, Clark quietly filed it away. If Geno didn't believe in her, she would find a place that did.
That's the worst part about new fans. They have no perspective. There's no context. So they just say ridiculous nonsense.
So, she chose Iowa, a program devoid of UConn's gleaming banners, its mythical aura, or its dynastic glow. To many, it appeared to be a mere consolation prize, a fallback option. But for Caitlin Clark, it was a profound act of liberation. At Iowa, she wasn't destined to be Paige's shadow. She wasn't Geno's forgotten afterthought. She was the recruit, the undeniable force who would carry the entire program on her shoulders. From the very second she laced up her shoes in Iowa City, she began, with audacious flair, to rewrite the entire script. Her signature logo threes weren't just shots. They were bold statements echoing across courts. Her sold-out arenas weren't just crowds. They were irrefutable proof of her drawing power. Her record-shattering TV ratings weren't flukes. They were undeniable receipts, tallying her impact. Every single basket, every viral highlight, every broken record she achieved served as a potent, constant reminder, you missed this. Meanwhile, rather than embracing humility, Geno Auriemma chose to double down on his entrenched arrogance. He consistently brushed her off with condescending sound bites, infamously calling her a kid playing like she's in the driveway. Instead of acknowledging her as a generational, transformative force, he desperately attempted to shrink her undeniable brilliance into something utterly ordinary. But ordinary doesn't pack Madison Square Garden to capacity. Ordinary doesn't drag the entire WNBA into mainstream relevance, turning casual viewers into fervent fans. And, as he would soon discover, ordinary certainly doesn't cost you millions. This, precisely, is where the irony bites with a razor-sharp edge. Geno slammed the door shut when Caitlin Clark came knocking. He genuinely believed she would simply fade into obscurity, becoming just another good player. Instead, she meticulously constructed the biggest empire women's basketball has ever witnessed, and she did it all without him. And when he finally, inevitably, circled back, contract clutched in hand, Clark didn't rage. She didn't gloat, savoring a long-awaited "I told you so." She simply, devastatingly, said no. And that single, understated word ultimately cost him far more than any championship loss ever could.
The delusional fan base that follows her disrespected the WNBA players by saying she's going to go in that league and tear it apart. There were actually odds on she's third or fourth in betting odds on being MVP of the WNBA. These people are so disrespectful and so unknowledgeable and so stupid that it gives women's basketball a bad name. Okay, so the kid was set up for failure right from the beginning.
Geno Auriemma, it seemed, just couldn't help himself. Anytime Caitlin Clark's name entered a conversation, he found an almost involuntary way to pull her back into the familiar orbit of Paige Buecher's comparisons. If Clark was fearless, well, Paige was too. If Clark was connecting with fans on an unprecedented level, so, he insisted, had Paige. This wasn't random. It was a calculated strategy. By perpetually tethering Clark's meteoric rise to his chosen, established players, Geno cunningly kept himself firmly entrenched in the spotlight. He desperately wanted the world to believe her unprecedented success was nothing truly new, nothing separate from the monolithic dynasty he had so meticulously constructed. But backhanded compliments, however subtly delivered, were thin over time. And people, eventually, began to notice. Fans noticed. Sharp-eyed analysts noticed. Other astute coaches noticed. They collectively saw through the thinly veiled act. Clark's brilliance didn't require qualifiers or comparisons. It shone fiercely on its own terms. She was single-handedly drawing larger crowds than most professional franchises, shattering records the sport had never before conceived, and fundamentally rewriting the entire conversation surrounding women's basketball. Yet, there stood Geno, smiling for the cameras, all the while subtly, desperately, clinging to his crumbling throne. Behind the practiced charm lay a profound insecurity, the kind that surfaces when the unwavering spotlight begins to shift away, and there's absolutely nothing you can do to stop its relentless movement. And eventually, inevitably, the mask slipped entirely. The sly digs and veiled criticisms were no longer sufficient for his escalating discomfort. Geno transitioned from merely undermining Clark to outright attacking the very people who so passionately supported her. For months, his strategy had been a masterclass in shade, cleverly disguised as objective commentary. Then, in June 2024, during a now infamous interview on The Dan Patrick Show, he crossed an irreversible line, one he could never truly walk back. The Hall of Fame coach, the man who was widely considered to represent the absolute pinnacle of women's basketball, didn't just question Caitlin Clark's abilities. He launched a full frontal assault on her burgeoning fanbase. He declared, without equivocation, that the delusional fan base that follows her disrespected the WNBA players by saying she's going to go in that league and tear it apart. There were actually odds on what are like she's third or fourth in betting odds on being MVP of the WNBA. These people are so disrespectful and so unknowledgeable. And so stupid that it gives women's basketball a bad name. Okay, so the kid was set up for failure right from the beginning. His words weren't subtle. They were a blunt, aggressive hammer blow. He brazenly called her supporters delusional, asserted they utterly failed to understand the nuances of the game, and then, with breathtaking audacity, claimed their supposed cluelessness was actively damaging women's basketball itself. What egregious crime had these fans committed to provoke such a venomous outpouring? Simply believing Clark could finish among the top 4 in MVP voting as a rookie. To Geno, that wasn't passionate belief. It was pure stupidity, a notion Diana Taurasi had ironically echoed earlier, declaring, "This kid's in for a rude awakening." Take a moment to truly absorb the magnitude of that. Millions of fresh, eager eyes had just flooded into women's basketball, drawn almost entirely by the magnetic pull of Caitlin Clark. Families were showing up en masse, adorned in jerseys bearing her name. Children were camping out, shivering with anticipation, just to catch a glimpse of her. Casual fans, who had never before bothered with the league, were now eagerly tuning into WNBA broadcasts for the very first time. And Geno's astounding response? Not gratitude, not celebration, not even a simple welcome, but a torrent of thinly veiled insults. Instead of embracing this unprecedented wave of new energy, he openly mocked it, ridiculing its source. This wasn't astute analysis. This wasn't a coach judiciously breaking down strengths and weaknesses. This was deeply, fiercely personal. It was a direct, calculated shot aimed squarely at the very lifeblood of Clark's burgeoning movement, the very people who had, against all odds, propelled women's basketball into the mainstream spotlight with their sheer enthusiasm. Geno wasn't just dismissing Clark. He was dismissing the fans who made her extraordinary rise possible. And because he carried the weighty name of Geno Auriemma, people listened. His words, dripping with a manufactured authority, carried immense weight, which is precisely what made them so damaging and, ultimately, so profoundly revealing. By branding her fans as clueless, he wasn't merely underestimating their understanding. He was fundamentally underestimating her. He was implicitly declaring that the explosive hype wasn't genuinely real. That her success was merely a fleeting phenomenon, entirely unsustainable, and that, in the end, his own myopic predictions would be triumphantly proven correct. But here, the narrative takes a deliciously satisfying turn. Geno wasn't right. He wasn't even remotely close. Clark didn't engage in a Twitter spat. She didn't cancel interviews in a fit of pique. She didn't need to. Her devastatingly effective response unfolded in the only arena that truly mattered, the court itself. And what transpired wasn't just sweet vindication. It was a total demolition of Geno Auriemma's rapidly crumbling credibility.
And Diana said it best. This kid's in for a rude awakening.
Caitlin Clark didn't just go out and win Rookie of the Year. She soared past that initial milestone. She clinched a spot on the coveted All-WNBA first team. And when the final MVP votes were painstakingly tallied, She finished in precisely 4th place, exactly where her supposedly delusional fans had confidently predicted she would. The very prediction Geno had so contemptuously mocked became an undeniable reality. And with that, his entrenched authority, once seemingly unshakable, crumbled into dust. This wasn't merely a win for Clark. It was a profound vindication for her legion of fans, the very ones he had so openly ridiculed and insulted. Every parent who proudly brought their child to witness her magic. Every casual fan who, for the first time, eagerly tuned in. Every new supporter who dared to buy into the intoxicating hype, Geno had scornfully dismissed them as a problem. Clark, with every precise pass and every daring shot, proved them prophetic. And the sheer beauty of it all? She accomplished this without uttering a single word against him. This was silent revenge in its purest, most potent form. No furious rant, no heated confrontation, no manufactured drama, just undeniable, irrefutable results. Night after night, she delivered captivating performances that left absolutely no room for excuses or doubt, audacious logo threes that stretched the defense. Mesmerizing crossovers that left seasoned defenders frozen in their tracks. And pinpoint assists that ignited highlight reels across the internet. By the time the awards and accolades poured in, there was simply no debate left to be had. She had utterly silenced him, all without ever once speaking his name. Do you truly grasp the exquisite poetry in that? Geno had meticulously positioned himself as the ultimate gatekeeper of women's basketball knowledge. The wise elder who inherently knew better than the fervent fans. Better than the often fickle media, better than virtually anyone else. And yet, it was the fans who were proven right. It was Clark who was undeniably right. And it was Geno who was resoundingly, embarrassingly wrong. Every arena she meticulously sold out, every single record she spectacularly shattered. Every prestigious accolade she rightfully earned served as another painful, inescapable reminder that he was no longer the kingmaker. She didn't need him. She never truly did. And here's the most profound irony of all, Clark wasn't deliberately trying to prove Geno Auriemma wrong. She wasn't chasing his elusive approval. She wasn't even consciously thinking about him in the grand scheme of her journey. She was simply, authentically, being Caitlin Clark. And that, in itself, was more than enough to expose him, enough to utterly humble him, enough to unequivocally show the entire world that he was no longer the one solely shaping the narrative. She was. By the climactic conclusion of her rookie year, the discussion extended far beyond whether Clark had merely lived up to the towering hype. It transformed into a testament to how completely and utterly she had obliterated every single doubt, leaving no shred of uncertainty in her wake. Geno's venomous insults, once delivered with such self-assured conviction, didn't merely age poorly. They aged like milk left baking in the scorching sun. His contemptuous comments about her fans now read as some of the most spectacularly awful takes in the annals of sports history, bitter, deeply insecure, and embarrassingly, definitively wrong. But Geno, it became glaringly clear, simply couldn't let go. Being unequivocally wrong was an indigestible pill, something his colossal ego simply couldn't stomach. And by this point, the conflict wasn't solely about Clark's phenomenal game. It had escalated, fundamentally, to what she profoundly represented, the undeniable changing of the guard. A seismic shift in power dynamics, the inescapable, undeniable truth that women's basketball no longer revolved around his singular, dwindling influence. And instead of gracefully accepting this paradigm shift, he did precisely what he always does. He kept talking. Interview after interview, podcast after podcast, her name perpetually lingering on his lips. And each time, the disheartening pattern monotonously repeated itself, a sliver of grudging praise, quickly followed by a thinly veiled dig, a compliment carefully wrapped in a cynical disclaimer. But the more he spoke, the more glaringly obvious it became. Caitlin Clark wasn't just meticulously rewriting the record books. She was living, rent-free, inside Geno Auriemma's head. At some point, mere words simply ceased to be enough. Geno Auriemma had spent countless months attempting to shape the entire narrative. Employing sly comparisons, delivering backhanded compliments, and launching increasingly desperate digs at Clark's loyal fans. Yet, despite his relentless efforts, Clark kept winning, kept shining brighter, and his once formidable influence continued its steady, undeniable shrinking. So, he pivoted. If he couldn't control the narrative with the power of his voice, perhaps he could command it with the undeniable influence of money.
They've tried to do everything they could to make the most of the situation. They tried to make the most of Caitlin Clark not playing by hinting everything and basically making people think that Caitlin Clark was going to play.
That's precisely how the audacious $1 million offer materialized, landing with a resounding thud. By then, Geno had already exhausted every conceivable tactic in his arsenal. He had contemptuously ignored her as a burgeoning teenage talent. He had dismissively brushed off her meteoric rise to stardom. He had audaciously belittled her fervent supporters. He had even tried, in a desperate, convoluted effort, to reframe her burgeoning stardom as nothing more than an incidental byproduct of UConn's enduring dynasty. None of it, however, worked. Clark continued her relentless, upward climb, while Geno, with painful clarity, kept fading into irrelevance. Then, an opportunity arose, conspicuously wrapped in gleaming dollar signs. A brand new, ambitious venture, unrivaled, a high-stakes 3-on-3 women's league, financially backed by high-profile stars like Breanna Stewart and Nafisa Collier. With Geno Auriemma himself deeply entrenched and heavily involved behind the curtain, the league certainly had ambition. It boasted significant funding. But it crucially lacked the one, indispensable element that truly mattered, a face. And it was then that the sheer, unadulterated desperation was laid bare for all to see. Because for all the established big names strategically involved, only one player possessed the magnetic power to instantly grant the project legitimacy. Only one athlete could single-handedly drag in millions of devoted fans, attract eager media partners, and secure lucrative sponsors. Only one unparalleled star possessed the kind of gravitational pull necessary to transform Unrivaled into a genuine, formidable rival for the entrenched WNBA. That star, undeniably, was Caitlin Clark. And so, Geno Auriemma, against every fiber of his being, did the unthinkable. He came knocking, hat in hand. Reports unequivocally confirmed that the nascent league offered Clark a staggering sum. Over $1 million for an incredibly brief 8-week season, one of the richest contracts ever presented in the history of women's basketball. Let that truly sink in. The very same coach who once couldn't be bothered to pick up the phone during her formative recruitment was now shamelessly dangling 7 figures, practically begging her to rescue his brand new league from obscurity. The same man who once audaciously declared to the world that her hype was merely an illusion, not truly real, was suddenly, overtly, attempting to monetize that very same hype. The same coach who, with such disdain, labeled her fans delusional now desperately needed those exact same delusional fans to stream his games and enthusiastically purchase his tickets. The irony, as many observed, was utterly delicious.
And there's a lot of investors in this league. One investor, been trying to keep quiet about, his investment in the league ever since his comments that he made about a young rookie. Pretty much, had him in the headlines for about a month and a half. That is Geno Auriemma, dog. I'm here to tell you, he's part owner of this league.
Make no mistake, this wasn't merely shrewd business. This was deeply, intensely personal. If Geno could successfully land Clark, he believed he could deftly twist the entire narrative to his advantage. He could then shamelessly claim her unprecedented rise was still intrinsically tied to his system, his visionary insight, his unwavering authority. he could audaciously present her as a mere extension of the grand empire he had meticulously built, rather than the undeniable symbol of its inevitable collapse. But Caitlin Clark, with her sharp intellect and unwavering resolve, was not easily fooled. When the lucrative contract slid across her desk, she didn't perceive an incredible opportunity. Instead, she recognized it for what it truly was, a profound test, a desperate, last-gasp power grab from a man who had spent years, trying, with every fiber of his being, to minimize her colossal impact and undeniable worth. Her answer, when it finally came, was swift, resolute, and devastatingly simple. No. No elaborate explanations, no cautious hedging, no agonizing hesitation. Just one singular, powerful word that carried more undeniable weight than all of Geno's self-serving interviews combined. She didn't need his money. She didn't need his fledgling platform. She certainly didn't need his grudging approval. The very man who once so carelessly brushed her aside was now, ironically, asking for her help. And she declined with a calm, understated grace that cut far deeper than any explosive clapback ever could. And with that definitive no, the humiliation was complete, laid bare for the entire world to witness. Geno Auriemma, the once unassailable gatekeeper who had meticulously built his formidable reputation on his uncanny ability to spot and expertly mold unparalleled talent, had been reduced to the humiliating act of offering a fortune to the one player he had so confidently, so arrogantly, once dismissed. And she, with quiet dignity, turned him down flat, decisively, without a trace of bitterness, devoid of any drama, simply a clean, unambiguous rejection. The fallout, predictably, was brutal. Without the magnetic pull of Clark, Unrivaled instantly lost its essential magnet, its compelling centerpiece, its fundamental credibility. The much-hyped million-dollar offer transformed, in the public eye, from a perceived show of strength into a stark, undeniable admission of profound weakness. The entire project desperately needed her far more than she ever needed it. And when she calmly, resolutely walked away, the initial, manufactured hype surrounding the league collapsed entirely, even before it had a chance to truly begin. Fans, with keen insight, knew precisely what narrative was unfolding before their very eyes. Social media platforms erupted with a cascade of laughter and mockery, gleefully clowning Geno for genuinely believing Clark would ever swoop in to save him after years of his casual, cutting disrespect. The elaborate chess match he mistakenly believed he was orchestrating ended abruptly, brutally, in a single, devastating move. And Clark didn't even break a sweat. She didn't launch into a furious rant. She didn't publicly drag his name through the mud. She didn't even dignify him with an acknowledgement beyond her final, decisive choice. She simply, gracefully, walked away. And that profound silence, louder than any words, cut deeper than any verbal confrontation ever could.
This one looked like Geno Auriemma. Could be the reason why Caitlin Clark is definitely not joining the unrivaled 3-on-3 basketball league.
Because here is the undeniable truth: Geno's era is emphatically over. His once unquestionable power is irrevocably gone. And Caitlin Clark didn't just dethrone him. She, with audacious grace, utterly torched the very throne he once sat upon. For countless decades, Geno and the entrenched old guard of women's basketball dictated who mattered, who was worthy of recognition. They meticulously controlled the pathways to success, meticulously crafted the prevailing narratives, and strategically doled out opportunities. If you harbored aspirations of true greatness, you had no choice but to go through them, seeking their validation and permission. But Clark, with a force of will and talent, utterly shattered that outdated model. She didn't need UConn's gleaming banners to validate her inherent worth or monumental talent. She didn't need Geno's reluctant blessing to shine with unparalleled brilliance. Instead, she meticulously built her own formidable empire entirely from scratch, on her own terms. And in definitively rejecting his desperate million-dollar offer, she sent a crystal-clear, resounding message to the entire sporting world: the future. unequivocally, belongs to the players, not the gatekeepers of a fading past. That is precisely why this story stings so profoundly for Geno. His biggest, most colossal mistake wasn't merely ignoring Clark during her recruitment, a decision he undoubtedly came to regret. His true, monumental error was arrogantly assuming that the sport he purported to control could not possibly grow, could not evolve, could not flourish without his indispensable presence. He genuinely believed he was irreplaceable, an unmovable pillar. She, with quiet and devastating effectiveness, proved him utterly irrelevant. And the searing humiliation of that realization didn't solely belong to him. It served as a stark, undeniable warning shot fired across the bow of every remaining coach, every entrenched executive, every power broker still desperately clinging to the fragile illusion of control. Clark's final, resounding rejection wasn't merely personal revenge. It was a seismic cultural shift. It indelibly marked a profound transfer of power, drawing an unyielding line in the sand between the old guard's fading reign and the new, ascendant era. She demonstrated, with dazzling clarity, to an entire burgeoning generation of athletes that they do not require permission, they do not need validation, and they certainly do not need approval to lead. They possess the fervent fans, the undeniable numbers, and the sheer star power to chart their own, independent path to greatness. And she proved it all with the simplest, yet most potent, of weapons, a single, resolute no. So perhaps the old saying is flawed, even wrong. Maybe revenge isn't best served cold, a calculated chill. Perhaps the sweetest revenge is served quietly, with calm, unwavering finality. Delivered in the potent form of one decisive rejection that unequivocally exposes just how utterly desperate your enemy has truly become. Caitlin Clark didn't just reject a contract. She rejected Geno's entire system, his eroding authority, his entire outdated worldview. And in doing so, she didn't just win. She fundamentally, irrevocably, changed the game itself. Do you think Geno deserved it? Let us know down in the comments. Like, subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you never miss out on another story that reveals the hidden truths and power shifts behind the headlines.